I think for a number of Redskins fans, there was a feeling of kind of inevitability of doom about this 2019 season, a bit of a dose of reality. Kind of more the resignation that it's set in is that Jay Gruden's on borrowed time. Bruce Allen's the general manager, so it doesn't matter. So what the hell difference does it make? And surely, heading into the 2019 season, with the trade for Case Keenum, the drafting of Dwayne Haskins at pick number 15, the big money deal handed out for some reason to Landon Collins, Jay Gruden's warm seat got even hotter. And you knew that he was going to need to get off to a good start to have any chance to A, even make it through the season as head coach, and B, have any chances of returning in 2020. Well, before the season even started, there was the whole news breaking about the Trent Williams drama and the Trent Williams saga, about the team doctors butchering his diagnosis of the lump that he had on his head years ago that ended up being cancerous. And you have all of this drama. Here's a guy who's been arguably the player of your franchise of the decade of the 2010s, and now he wants out. To me, felt like he wanted more money, but there was also a broken trust there. And when you see this type of saga playing out and the season hasn't even started, you just got this feeling that it's not going to go very well. And it certainly didn't go very well for Jay Gruden, especially with the stubborn insistence on continuing to start Case Keenum, even though Case Keenum, after a couple of games, was getting his tail kicked. What the hell was the difference? It was all stunted opportunities for development for Dwayne Haskins that didn't happen because he insisted on trying to pathetically save his job by playing Case Keenum. Well, look what happened. The Redskins got off to what? An 0-5 start, and Jay Gruden was shown the door, as he should have been. It was time. Other people should have been shown the door then too, but you had to wait a few months for that. So you fired your head coach. Even Bill Callahan, the interim guy, doesn't want to play Dwayne Haskins right away. It's obvious there's a disconnect between the coaching staff as a whole, who didn't want Dwayne Haskins, and Daniel Snyder, who did. Ay, caramba. More typical Washington football team drama. But you look at this offense, though, whether it was Case Keenum, whether it was Dwayne Haskins, it didn't really matter. He had 11 games where they scored under 20 points, and they were 2-9 in those games. Newsflash, that's not good. 31st in the league in rushing yards allowed per game on defense. So their defense didn't know how to adjust to other teams, especially coming out for the second half. Offensively, they were 30th in total yards per game. This was just a really, really, really bad football team. It's that simple. And you can't even say it was injuries that much. Yes, you didn't have Trent Williams the entire season, but even then it speaks to the incompetence of Bruce Allen, where you had that saga for Kirk Cousins play out for a couple of years, and all the while Kirk Cousins eventually left and you got absolutely nothing for him in terms of immediate return. Then you've got Trent Williams, who doesn't want to be there, where there would be a market for a premier level type of blindside protector like him. You have the chance to trade him, save some face, get something out of it, and of course you Bruce Allened it. You got nothing. And he didn't play for you. He did nothing for you. But you got 5 games out of Darius Geis, 10 games out of Paul Richardson. But in general, you didn't get much out of Jordan Reed, absolutely. But, a few injuries here and there, but that's not the excuse. The reason that they didn't finish well this year is because they weren't a good football team. They had poor leadership, the roster construction pretty poor, and was just lacking for big-time difference makers and impact players. And it's no surprise to me that changes were on the horizon for this Redskins organization after this season. Like even Daniel Snyder, for all you could say about him and the disaster that's been his reign as team owner over the past 2 decades, even he had to see the tea leaves and recognize that this was pathetic. This was unacceptable, and big, big, big changes had to be made. And while it's not perfect, and while progress doesn't automatically guarantee significantly improved performance, progress has been made. Is Daniel Snyder starting to finally learn his lessons? Because not only is Bruce Allen no longer the general manager of the Washington football team, he has been fired completely from the organization. That toxicity is gone. And Redskins fans rejoice. Because it is amazing when you talk about the Redskins and living out here in Richmond, Virginia, a lot of Redskins fans out here. They didn't hate Jay Gruden the most. They didn't even hate Daniel Snyder the most. The single biggest bane in almost every single Redskins fan's existence was Bruce Allen. That's how much they hated this man. Because they knew he was the shits. They knew he was terrible. And now he's gone. And in the meantime, the Redskins acted like that and hired an established, proven NFL head coach who has experience working with a young, raw quarterback in Ron Rivera, Riverboat Ron with the Redskins. If you're a Skins fan, you got to say, hooray! Because your defense stunk. You know Ron Rivera can work with that and make that better. Your young quarterback needs a lot of work. He is familiar with working with a young, raw quarterback. But more than that, Ron Rivera represents somebody that players and other people within the organization are going to respect. He has a bit of a command presence about him, but he conducts himself in a way that's not going to be off-putting, whereas a Jay Gruden could kind of be off-putting. And you talk about him, and then whether it's going to be somebody like a Jack Del Rio as a defensive coordinator or whoever it's going to be, you would have to assume that that defense that does have some talent on it is going to be markedly improved in 2019. Like, this was not just any type of head coaching hire for the Washington Redskins. It feels like he has the potential a little bit to be a bit of a culture changer for an organization that really, really badly needs a culture change. But it's not all bad for the Redskins, as bad as this season ultimately played out. This 2019 draft class was really good. It was really, really good. And if that's Bruce Allen's parting shot to the organization, then it wasn't a bad one. I know Dwayne Haskins had some good, but he had plenty of bad moments. But at least you could say this. You've got the young guy in the fold. You don't know fully whether he's the guy yet or not, but there's still a chance. It wasn't such a disaster that you know there's absolutely no shot for improvement or a shot for him being the guy. Montez Sweat, the other first-round pick, the edge rusher from Mississippi State, had 7 sacks. Like, he's going to be a big-time player for them down the road. Terry McLaurin was an absolute gem and a steal in the 3rd round. Cole Holcomb played 16 games at inside linebacker, and he looks promising. Jimmy Moreland, a late-round pick, played in 14 games. Calvin Harmon, who still to me inexplicably dropped to the 6th round coming out of NC State, had 30 catches for 365 yards. Like, that was a really good draft class with the potential still to get a lot better, especially if you get a lot more out of Dwayne Haskins. So it's not all bad. It's not all doom and gloom. It could turn around very, very quickly for this team. When you look at the offseason to come, they've got about $46.5 million in cap space, so they can go out there and make a couple of moves, especially if they do some things to increase their salary cap space. Talking about some cap casualties. Jordan Reed, you could save $8.5 million by getting rid of him. He gone. Josh Norman, oh, this is obvious. $12.5 million could be saved. He gone. So right there, you're talking about $21 million between two guys. All of a sudden, you go from $46.5 million in cap space to you're talking about $67, almost $68 million in cap space. I mean, you're doing something. Then you got the possibility of what could come with Trent Williams in this situation. Now, you could just end up cutting him, which would save you $12.5 million under the cap, but would make you look really, really bad. You know, I don't know how much he's going to really truly command on the trade market. Maybe you get a contending team that needs help at offensive tackle to get desperate and give you a late 2nd round pick, perhaps. But I don't know if they can get that much because they really missed their window of time here to trade him, I feel like, and get a great package. He's north of 30. He's had some injury problems in recent years, and he didn't play in 2019. So there's a lot of risk and gamble associated with paying a big price in terms of draft pick capital to bring in a guy like Trent Williams. That said, you would have to figure for the Redskins, if they're not going to figure out some way to pay him and keep him in the fold, then what they must do is make a decision quickly, trade him, get that $12.5 million in extra cap space. Because again, now you're talking about with those three players right there, they can add over $30 million in cap space. You're talking about close to $80 million in cap. You can go out there in free agency and get some guys. And while, yes, you say Daniel Snyder, we don't want him going out there and getting big guys. Well, maybe with Ron Rivera more involved with the personnel decisions, maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing. I will also be interested to see what they do with Alex Smith. He's got a huge cap figure that's going to be incredibly prohibitive for them to trade away. Lots of dead cap associated. Can't just cut them. Or maybe you do and you eat the dead cap this year when you've got a ton of that space, and maybe that would make some sense. I think there would still be a bit of a market out there for an Alex Smith, but it's probably best to find a way to one way or another move on from him because you need to be balls deep, pardon the phrase, with Dwayne Haskins. You must. And by having Alex Smith even continue to linger around, that's not going to happen. There'd be that thought of, oh, maybe we go to him, and then you've ruined the young quarterback, and then you're still looking for a young quarterback. In terms of the team free agents, the big one's going to be Brandon Scherf. You'd assume they would be probably using some of that cap space to lock him up long term, even though he's had a little bit of recent issues in terms of injuries. This is a guy they once took in the top 5 of the draft. You got to look at him and you got to say, okay, you've got a young quarterback. You need to protect your young quarterback. You already have the saga with Trent Williams. Can you really afford to let Brandon Scherf go? I would think worst case scenario, he's going to end up getting franchised. You got guys like Chris Thompson, Case Keenum, Aaron Flowers, Adrian Peterson, John Bostic. Some or all of them could be brought back, minus Case Keenum, or none of them could be brought back, and I don't think that's going to hurt anyone's feelings. Perhaps the one you'd want back the most out of all of them might be Chris Thompson. It might be, but I don't know. In terms of looking ahead to the draft for the Redskins, they ended up with the number 2 overall pick. They've got their first-round pick. They don't have the second-round pick because they traded it to the Colts to get Montez Sweat last year, and that's okay. They've got picks in the 3rd round, 4th round, 5th round, a couple of 7th-round picks. When you look at their team needs, though, I think number 1 team need is going to be left tackle because I find it very, very hard to believe that Trent Williams is going to be playing for the Washington Redskins in 2020. So as a result, do you really want to run out there with that offensive line protecting Dwayne Haskins? I don't think so. You've got to protect him. Then you got to look at the interior of that offensive line, even if you retain Brandon Scherf, especially if you do not. You still need to get better. The bottom line is the Redskins were bad enough to end up in the position with the number 2 overall pick in this draft. You have to look at pretty much every single position and say these guys can be upgraded and improved upon. And then it's just a matter of playing the draft board and taking best available player regardless of most positions, frankly. Obviously, they could use an impact player at tight end. I think Jeremy Sprinkle did some nice things this year, but he's more of a role play guy. He's not a role player guy. Get that right. I don't necessarily see him as being a guy that's going to be a big-time tight end for you. You're going to get rid of Josh Norman, you would assume, unless they get hit by a truck and they lose their senses. So corner is going to be a need. And then you've got defensive end, too, edge rusher. Assuming Ron Rivera is going to switch to a 4-3, how will Kerrigan and Sweat fit in that 4-3? Furthermore, Kerrigan's in his 30s in the last year of his deal. It's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out for the Redskins. They're sitting there at pick 2. They're not going to be drafting a quarterback, one would assume. At that point in time, are they going to take an offensive tackle to protect Dwayne Haskins' blind side? Or are they going to be taking the edge rusher like a Chase Young? If you look at it, if you're the Redskins and you want to make a quick turnaround, you want to do something like what the 49ers did. You've already got Jonathan Allen. You've got Ioannidis. Now you have Montez Sweat and Ryan Kerrigan. If you add a Chase Young to that, that is a defensive line that can get after it. That is a defensive line that can wreak havoc, especially in the NFC least. Are you kidding me? With a really good offseason and a very good draft, and getting somebody like a Chase Young, a potential real impact player, with a quality proven commodity at head coach like Ron Rivera, especially with the recent history of a new divisional winner every year, it would not be surprising to me at all to see the Redskins, if they get it right this offseason, to go from worst to first in the NFC East.